Hello, Platforms. We're so happy you're here to visit our studio. I'm Kathy Weaver, the cameraman is Nelson Armour, and we are A&W Studios. We're very pleased that we have this chance that Artemis gave us to do this little video. Thank you, Artemis and Platforms, for being flexible in this terrible time. We really appreciate an opportunity to welcome you to our studio. As you can see, this is a very old building. It was an ice house originally. It's more than 100 years old. And our studio was the stables where the horses were. So come on in and welcome to A&W Armour Weaver Studios. Okay, a little more quiet in here. We are in an urban environment, so you may have heard sounds of the L train going by that's famous in Chicago. But here we are. I have the downstairs area. It's very light-filled. This was, like I said, the stable, and then it was turned into a little theater. My husband is upstairs. He doesn't need a lot of light because he's oftentimes on the computer. So you can see we have, I have lots of different kinds of work. My main work right now, my focus is on a series that I'm calling The Origin Story. And that's what I would have been presenting at Platforms. This is a narrative series. I probably have 30-some paintings at this point. It's an ongoing saga that has to do with issues of good and evil. They're very cheerful looking paintings. Let's take a look a little more closely. For example, they draw you in with the color and the hard edge. They're kind of in a folkloric manner. They're gouache on handmade paper. But I do react to what's happening in politics and in our everyday life. For example, I started this one early March when the COVID was just appearing. And indeed, it was the tip of a terrible iceberg. So I try to interpret these things. The theme mainly has to do, as I said, with good and evil, the boundaries between them. For example, this one was my reaction to Trump's separating children and parents at the Mexican border. It's called Dumping the Babies. And so it shows the origin of evil in some ways, and a lot of this is about the boundaries between evil and good. How far can you push it? What are the boundaries? Not everyone's totally evil, not everyone's totally good. And what is the stepping off point there? And how can we sometimes come to some kind of a rapprochement over issues that we're deeply divided about. And I also do larger scale work, as you can see on the floor. These are the characters of the baby. Cycles of life, birth on the right, and then learning as they're growing up, hitting the bar, trying to excel.
Could you tell me a little bit about the characters in your paintings?
Right. I have 4 main characters at this point. I have the winged one. They seem to be good, but oftentimes they also appear to be a little ominous, as in the one to the left, where they're surrounding the 2 little girls. The children are another character. A third character are the bullet heads. Here we see the bullet heads hauling away, accompanying the stone men, and this was influenced by Bruegel. And those are the 4 characters: the stone men, the winged men, the children, and the bullet heads. And here's an example of one. The bullet heads, who usually are pretty evil, swimming with sharks, accompanying in a militaristic fashion many of the pictures. But here's an example of the bullet heads with their family, just having a sweet little picnic. So that gives you just a slight overview of the paintings. I have had several of them collected by museums. I have a catalog that's available online about the works, and I'll show that to you right now. Catalog that it has the pictures within.
Hi, platforms. This is Nelson Armour, the other half of the A&W Armour and Weaver studio. You just got introduced to my wife, Kathy Weaver. And now I'd like to talk to you about the work that I was planning to show at Platforms. And I've hung the larger versions of the work since we're at our studio. And this is a project that's called At Work on El Trabajo and At Home on Casa. And this project was inspired by a photographer by the name of Milton Rogovin. And Mr. Rogovin found himself in the 1960s and 70s going into coal mines, steel mills, and auto plants, and he would photograph workers in their work situation, and then he would go home with them and he would photograph them at home and create this pairing of people at work, workers at work, and workers at home. And when I saw this exhibit a number of years ago, or some examples of this exhibit, I was very inspired by it. But at the time, my wife and I lived in a suburb of Chicago, and I had no connection to manufacturing workers. But I thought about what workers do I come in contact with on a regular basis, and basically the answer was I came in contact with a lot of service workers, restaurant workers, and landscape workers. And so I thought of conceiving this project with landscape workers, and was able to get a number of people who were willing to participate with me. So here we see the owner of a small landscape firm, and in our area these individuals are first generation immigrants, usually from Mexico, and one of their entries into work, particularly their own work, is oftentimes they start working on a landscape crew, save up some money, and then they start their own small business as landscapers themselves. And so the way most people in the community would come across these individuals would be as they're doing their work. But what was important to me was to also show them as people that have full lives, that have wives and mothers, and are also members of the community. And this is a photograph that most people in the community would not see, because this would be on a Sunday, or this would be with them at home. And it's this dichotomy of the service worker at work and the service worker at home that brings out the full humanity of the people. And one of the reasons I thought this would be a great project to show for Platforms is certainly in Greece and in Europe, with the immense amount of migration that has happened in the last couple of years, and even before that, this same issue arises, seeing people either as just immigrants or seeing people as human beings with families, with hopes and dreams and aspirations. So this other photograph, I have a whole series of them, was Mr. Delgado's son, David. And again, seeing David as just a landscape worker, you would see a young man, fairly serious, and you would wonder, who is this guy? Why is he doing this? And yet, when you then see David with his family, you see him in a totally different context. And that is, what I want people to do is to see workers not only, and immigrants, not only for the work that they do, the service that they do to the community, but also as family people. And so this is, I think, a series that is very universal. And I think when you see the two pictures together, there's kind of like a aha, It doesn't need, I think, a lot of explaining. People get this juxtaposition, this pairing of at work and at home. And so this was why, I wanted to show some of this work in Grace. I'd like to show you a little bit of some other work that I'm doing, and that is a couple examples of two other projects. One of them is called Near But Far, and in this series I try to position some of Chicago's very famous buildings in the background. That was once the tallest building in the world. But in the foreground, I try to kind of present another thing that's happening in Chicago. And here was an old bar that has gone through many iterations trying to be successful. And here, again, you're right near the downtown of Chicago, but you're seeing it from the vantage point of the commuter railroad tracks coming in. And there's an ironic little sign on this building called the 16th Street Tower, and all of this train traffic is coming through, and this ramshackle tower is one of the control points for all of this, and it kind of is a question of what the infrastructure is all about. In this series called Beyond, I've taken different settings, whether they're indoor settings. This one is in Denmark at the Castle of Helsinore, and this is in rural New Zealand. And I tried to take the actual physical place and move you back into a more conceptual place where you're in a different setting, maybe a more, I wouldn't say universal setting, but in a setting where maybe you're more in your mind as opposed to the specific location. And that's another thing I'm doing in this final series I'm going to just introduce you to. And this is called The Art of Viewing Art. And in this case, what I've done is I've captured people in art museums and art galleries, and I've abstracted the detail of the situation out. So what you're seeing maybe is trying to transport yourself into the mind of these individuals as they are viewing the artwork and kind of think, what are they thinking? What are they feeling? What is this art doing for them? And, sometimes I'm able to catch a fairly ironic situation, as I did here. And again, taking you out of the detail of the situation into a more general situation. So, just wanted to again thank Platforms, Artemis, everybody who's worked on Platforms. It was really great of all of you to put together an opportunity for all of us to show our work, even though we physically couldn't be there due to the pandemic. So we wish everybody to be safe and sound, and hopefully this pandemic will pass and we'll have a chance to meet in the future. Thank you. Nelson Armour here.